let's get started. So we got a vernal pool. So review from yesterday. What makes this different from other wetlands or ponds, other water bodies? So what makes this different? There was a whole list of characteristics we talked about. It dries up. So it's ephemeral. So it has seasonality to it. Usually late in the fall it's dry. Or at this point it probably was dry not too long ago, and it's probably started to refill already with the rain that we got later here in the fall. And also the plants aren't transpiring anymore, so the water's accumulating more. So that was one. So ephemeral. What else? Other characteristics that make a vernal pool different from other small water bodies. Fishless. What other predators are missing? What hopping predators are missing? Bullfrogs and green frogs. Super. Yep. So those kind of key predators. They need other. Actually, bullfrogs and green frogs usually are in larger water bodies. Same with fish, obviously, too. Okay, so we got that. What else? Yeah, there's no inlet or outlet. There's no stream flowing through it. So that makes it isolated, which also helps with the fishless characteristic as well. What else? We're doing well. We're ticking them off. What else? Let this car go by. Oh. What else is characteristic of a vernal pool? There's 2 or 3 more we're missing yet. Is Pashaw Lake a vernal pool? No, why not? What makes this? Think about size. Does size matter? They're small. Yes, usually 10,000 square feet or smaller. Yes, so they tend to be small. Anything else important live here? Anything special? Key breeding grounds for amphibians. So it has specialized fauna that are associated with vernal pools. What was the most specialized one that I talked about yesterday? The fairy shrimp. Fairy shrimp are very vernal pool specific. So yes, they definitely are. But there's a lot of animals that are very vernal pool associated, like the wood frogs, the blue spotted salamander, the spotted salamander, Jefferson salamanders, ribbon snakes, and there's a number of turtles, spotted turtles, even wood turtles use vernal pools quite a bit. So yeah, so there's a lot of specialized fauna associated with vernal pools, as well as invertebrates as well, that we didn't talk about. Anything else? I'm trying to think, there might be one more I'm missing. Those are most of the criteria though. So how do we know where the vernal pool starts and ends? What can we use to identify the vernal pool, to delineate it? I don't know, has anybody had like a wetland delineation course in here or gone through training like that? So how do we delineate this type of ecosystem? Oh, we've gone from trucks to planes. All right, any thoughts about features that you might see before us or that you know about that would help us figure out where the boundaries of the vernal pool are located? Because obviously sometimes of the year this is totally dried up. So what would be your indicators? A depression in the landscape. That is definitely part of it. Yep. How do you figure out where the boundaries of that depression are, though? That's going to be our key question. So vegetation can be an indicator, right? So things like sedges, certain types of marsh grasses. What else is growing in here? It's a little harder to identify. The leaves are falling off, but anybody know any of these plants in here? There's a bunch of shrubby vegetation here that's indicative of wetlands. We've got spirea, probably Spirea alba in a couple of patches here, which is meadowsweet. We've got some winterberry over here. We mentioned the sedges and grasses. What else? What other green stuff is there that likes to be wet? Mosses. So we can also look at where the mosses are, and sometimes if you look at the bases of trees around the edges, you can see where the watermark is sort of in the spring based on where the moss line is on some of the trees and vegetation. So you can look for moss. So we got moss vegetation, we have a depression. What else? What other indicators do we have? There's a really obvious one in front of us. What is this? Yes, but do they look like all the other leaves in the forest? No, they're blackened. So you can use the blackened leaves as indicators of where the pool boundary is as well. Right now there's, this stuff that's wet is very distinctly black, but you can see up higher, right? There's black leaves that extend beyond the water's edge at the moment to get a sense of where the kind of high water mark is for the vernal pool. So you can use all of those things as indicators. And as I look around at some of the small trees, I can see where they're darker, where it looks like water has been up to kind of the base of the trees, like those in particular, and that little red maple clump there. You can kind of really see it. From this side you can see it. It might be harder from behind, but so where are the boundaries of this vernal pool? You should feel free to walk around a little bit too. So you think it goes back this way a little bit. It kind of looks like it might go up to the edge of the hill here on this side. What about in this direction? Where do you think the boundaries are going this way? So who can go back a little ways? Tell us what they see going back. Where do you think the boundary is to the east? I'd say we have kind of a distinct line here where because we have a sharp grade over on this side. So it's, I think, a very more distinctive boundary over here. But it's flatter over that way. So you're kind of standing at the edge, you think, about where? I think the tricky part is this direction. What do you think in terms of going that way? Because it's kind of low back there. Yeah, you can go back farther. So what are we thinking back here?
It probably comes to at least here, if not goes a little farther.
If not farther, what happens if we go farther? What do we find back here? There's almost like another possible depression back here, isn't there? Did you find something? Oh, that's a certain type of fungi. That's a fungus that does that. That's very, yeah, that's a really beautiful color.
The second one.
Yeah, so that might be another one. It might be more shallow and not hold water as long, but you can see the vegetation is similar, right? You can see the spirea in there. There is a little water.
These are darker, kind of.
Yep. Oh, it's getting squishy too. I can just feel the change. Okay, so what do you think now?
I think it's a series of vernal pools.
What was that?
I think it's a series of smaller vernal pools between this one and that one.
Yeah, so you want to be careful because we could have very easily stopped right back there, but there was sort of this grade that was coming back here and a little bit of a channel. So when it's really wet, these might be connected through this little channel here. So if you were delineating, you know, if you started delineating back there, would you include this or not? Yeah, you'd probably want to include this. So you'd actually start, you know, having really big kind of squiggly lines trying to include everything that you think is part of this vernal pool complex. So that's something to be careful of, and it's always worth walking around, because if we had just stayed on the west side by the road, we may have totally overlooked this whole piece over this way. So you definitely want to walk around and be generous in your circles, and as you delineate, you also want to be generous, because a lot of times of the year you don't have much water to work off of, so you want to make sure that you're not leaving out important components. So, all right. Anybody find any animals? We've gotten lucky. Once in a while we get a salamander, even this time of year, but I think we had one last year. I think we found a redback. One of the students found a redback salamander last year. And I would be careful about going in the water, because we don't want to spread like the chytrid fungus between pools. Because these are some really nice vernal pools. We want to keep them as nice, healthy, functioning vernal pools. So you do now, if you do start turning over dead wood, do put it back the way you try to put it back the way you found it, so that you're not completely disturbing the microhabitat. So just because there isn't a salamander there now doesn't mean there won't be one there in the future. All right, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to add here. I think that's good. Let's head back towards the road. So they captured salamanders here and wood frogs, and they tracked them to see where they were going. This is one of the pools that I believe had the blue-spotted Jefferson unisexual salamanders in it. So that was the that unisexual salamander complex. It's mostly females. So there were I think quite a few of them in this pool originally, and not a lot of actually the other salamanders. So it was really dominated by this unisexual salamander hybrid here, which is really interesting because you wonder how they are able to breed. It's such a weird breeding breeding system, I guess I'll call it. So I'm trying to think what else they did here. I know there were some other studies that were associated with that. They studied the water chemistry and other environmental characteristics of the pools. The next one we're going to was also part of this study as well. So why don't we head back to your cars. I'm now going to be the lead car. So we're going to head down to the Sewell Road parking lot that we came by. And we're just going to all remain parked on the road again, because obviously we're not all going to fit in that parking area either, and there were 4 cars there when we went by. So just stay on the side of the road that you're on now, and we'll just park right as you get to the parking lot, because actually we want to be on that side anyway. So, all right. Well, there's 7 specific habitat types that are identified, and that's how they are defined. It's defined literally by a list of habitat types. And the 3 that are most relevant to forestry are significant vernal pools, deer wintering areas that we talked about last time, and in particular those that are zoned deer wintering areas. And the third one that we haven't really talked much about is the inland wading bird and waterfowl habitat. And that one might not be clear why that is. Like, how does that affect forestry? You know, the deer winter yards makes sense because that's forest. This is clearly very influenced by forest, and there's guidelines. Where did the wading bird habitat impact forestry? Anybody know what issues there are? So with that, so if you were to delineate those wetlands that are being used, say by blue heron rookeries, there's a buffer zone that's around them that's protected, and you're not allowed to log within that buffer zone. So if you have an upland area that's on a property that you manage or own, if you have any part of your forest in that buffer zone, you would not be able to harvest trees in there. So that's an important area to know. You know, so if you have part of that buffer zone on your property, or if you're planning to do a timber harvest, you'd need to carefully delineate where that is, so that you're not encroaching into the buffer zone at all for that. So that's where it becomes important. The other significant wildlife habitats are mostly like coastal islands and coastal habitats that generally don't affect most forestry practices. So I tend to not talk about those, but you can look them up on the website. Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife has all of that on their website. So if you're curious to learn more about the other significant wildlife habitats, you may. So this is a significant vernal pool. It actually has a sister pool over here where that it looks like an oak tree maybe that's down over there. There's another, you can see the depression down over there. So there's another depression over there. Does everybody have a flag? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna split in half. Half of us are gonna go over to the other vernal pool. Half of you are gonna stay here. Let's see, we have how many people? So we've already got 5 people over here. 1, 2, 3. Let's see if I can take 4 more people. So I'm going to take the 4 people on the back side here. So you're going to go over to this vernal pool, and you guys all can stay on this vernal pool. So what you're going to do is you're going to space yourselves out equally. So kind of space yourself out. You'll maximize social distancing around the vernal pool. And you're going to go out 100 feet. And if you remember, 100 feet is going to define the protection zone. This will be the protection zone around the vernal pools. All right, so why don't the first group, you guys can spread yourself out, and then just pace it. Just go perpendicular from wherever you're standing. So find your edge. You'll have to figure out where your vernal pool edge is. And it's not going to be the water, it's going to be upland a little ways. So you'll have to find your boundary and then go 100 feet perpendicular outward from there. So first space yourselves out. You want to make sure you're all spread out, and then plant your flag at 100 feet. You might need to organize them before they all start marching off. All right. So I haven't been back here since this couple of trees went down. This is an added challenge. Actually, it looks like 3 trees maybe. Oh, we had an aspen. What do we have go down? An aspen, maybe we had a maple taken out. Wow, it's like dominoes in here. All right, so let's spread out evenly around this vernal pool. So a couple, maybe 3 people can get around the tree. All right, you're probably fine on this side. All right, so kind of evenly space yourselves. Pretty good. Try and find your high water mark. That's your next thing. So you can see on the trees that there's marks on the trees. You can look at where the moss is. You know, like on this, see how it's blackened? So that tells me the water gets at least that high. So find your high water mark, and then once you are happy with that, go 100 feet straight out from where you're standing.
Okay, then come back when you're done. Plant your flag and come back. Come on, we'll visit both tongues, both pools.
Start going down the hill towards wherever we that's an important point.
Because I ended up tripped over the other side of that.
Oh, did you go across the
There's like, yeah, I had to see like one more step.
Yeah, but I saw you back in there.
I was actually hoping to before that I could finish that.
Yeah. All right, we have everybody. Hopefully we have everyone. All right, so what did you observe when you put your flags out? So what did you observe when you put your flag out?
They overlap.
That the 2 areas overlapped, right? So these are very distinctly different vernal pools compared to the last pair. They have a distinct kind of berm in between them here. So they are, I don't know that they're ever really connected unless the whole area floods, but in terms of their protection zone, they're overlapping, right? So if you were to map the protection zone for these, they would be kind of, you know, a barbell or something kind of shape, right? That you would put around them at least. How might you do this? How would you actually delineate this? Let's say this was important, you know, in terms of your laying out a harvest plan or your management plan. Like, how would you go about delineating these? Like, what would you use to do it?
I'd probably use GIS.
GIS? You probably could do some of it with GIS. What would be even better than GIS? You would probably want to put this into GIS. What piece of equipment might you want to use?
Like a GPS?
Yeah, I would use a GPS, and I'd probably use a fairly high accuracy one, so that you can pretty clearly delineate the depression. Because based on our guidelines, we want to be able to define the depression and delineate it from the protection zone. So you probably want to be able to get a pretty accurate line, and you don't want an inaccurate GPS because that could be like plus or minus, you know, 30 feet or something on either side of your line. So you probably want a pretty accurate GPS. But then you can put that into a GIS, right? And then you could look at your forest cover, your forest inventory data, or whatever that's around it. So that's an important first step, is to be able to kind of delineate your depression. Think about where your zones are. So we just delineated the protection zone, but there's also the life zone, which is even farther out. That's 400 feet out. So that's an even bigger area. So we're starting to really, I mean, that's a pretty substantial area of the forest now at that point, right? I mean, and it's starting to be different stands as well, right? It's not just one stand, it's multiple stands that are part of that. And you can see we've got a planted stand of red pine over here, and we've got a more mixed wood, naturally regenerated stand over here. You know, so we've got different stands that are all part of this. All right, so just thinking about it. So there are new attempts also to use remotely sensed data like LiDAR to try to identify vernal pools as well. So that is another tool that you can use to get maybe a rough idea of where they are, at least a place where you might want to go and look, right? So you can use some of these resources to identify potential vernal pools, and then you might want to ground truth them with an actual site visit and see, and then maybe do a more careful delineation then. There is a statewide vernal pool shapefile available, so if you're ever doing this, many of them have been delineated already and are existing in a big shapefile that's available for 3D access statewide. Obviously, it's probably not going to have every vernal pool in it. I'm sure not everyone has been found and delineated, and not all vernal pools are significant either. So there is a layer out there if you're interested in doing more with this type of ecosystem, or if you're interested in working it into management plans, that can be really helpful as well. So another challenge with vernal pool management, the things that you can do are very straightforward if you own the whole area. So if this was all in one ownership, which it is, here it's all the university forest, the guidelines are really straightforward in terms of how you might apply them. What gets messy is when you have multiple landowners that share the vernal pool resource. And in terms of the guidelines that are out there, generally they say you don't want to impact more than like a quarter of the vernal pool area at one time. So if you're a single landowner, that's not that big a deal. But what if you have 4 landowners and everybody's allowed to impact 25% of the area? Then you might have a problem, right? If everybody decides to clear their trees or, put in a, recreation, track of some sort, or, expand their, put a garage or a shed farther back from their house or whatever, there's, if you have 4 landowners, they potentially can develop or remove trees on the whole area around a vernal pool. So you can impact up to 25% of the area with like development and complete tree removal kind of thing. So the land ownership is an important caveat into what's allowed in terms of development and harvesting. So let's think about our recommendations here. So these are guidelines. These are voluntary. These are not required. These are not regulations. These are guidelines. They were developed with foresters, and the idea was that as long as they're following the guidelines, there isn't a need for more restrictive regulations, right? So if everybody kind of follows the same guidelines and does a good job, then we've protected the resource, and the landowners don't have restrictive regulations imposed upon them. So that was the idea in creating these. And this was based somewhat on research that was available at the time. I think based on new research, they maybe would have changed some of this. Like, I would suspect that maybe that 400-foot limit have been extended a bit based on what we know now from all the telemetry data. I'd be curious to see what the folks who wrote this think about that idea, but so let's think a little bit about, let's say you are the forester for the landowner here, and you are tasked with setting up a timber harvest in this area. So let's say you've already delineated everything, you know where your zones are, you've done all this mapping. So let's look at what the actual guidelines say. So what would we want to do where we're standing? We'd probably want to do nothing. We're probably in the depression, most of us are probably still standing in what's considered the depression. So we wouldn't want to do any kind of timber practice. We wouldn't want to take heavy machinery in here. We wouldn't want to use chemicals. We wouldn't want to do anything in this protected area. So let's say you've got that nicely delineated. So now we're kind of more in these upland areas. So let's say we're in the 100-foot protection zone, which you've just delineated with your flags. So this is about 1.4 acres, roughly an area. It's going to vary depending on the size of the pool, obviously. So in our case, it might be a little bit bigger. This is a little bit bigger pool. So the idea is we want to maintain shade over the pool, right? That's going to keep the water temperature cooler. It's going to slow evaporation. We don't want the vernal pool to dry out too quickly, or our tadpoles and larval salamanders will not make it to adulthood. All right. We also don't want to disturb the woody debris that's in the pool as well. Why is that important? Why don't we want to mess around with the dead wood?
Eggs attached to it.
Yeah, the eggs attached. That's what they attach their egg masses to. So you don't want to mess around with the dead wood. Do you want to add more? Do you want to take your slash and dump it in the vernal pool? Well, that just creates more attachment points, doesn't it? But could that be a problem? Yeah, there's such thing as too much dead wood. You don't want to fill it, heaping with slash either. So you're best just to leave the dead wood that's there and not try and remove it or add any. Just let the dead wood naturally fall in to it. All right, so that's an important caveat. Okay, so we want to maintain shade. We want to maintain the coarse woody debris that's already there. We don't want to compact it or break it up in any way. Okay, so let's think about our silvicultural regeneration method options. So our goal is we want to maintain 75% canopy cover. So we can remove up to 25% of our canopy. So what silvicultural regeneration method would allow us to do that? Where we could remove trees but maintain 75% canopy cover in this zone. Are we going to clear cut it? Are we going to do a coppice regeneration? No, those are like almost 100% removal, so those we can eliminate. So, what does that leave us with? We're not going to do a seed tree either. What was that? Sorry. The shelter wood? What kind of shelter wood would you do? There's a bunch of different kinds of shelter woods. So also keep in mind that it's not on here. I think those trees need to be 20 to 30 foot tall. Is there ever an issue with the shelter wood? Because at a certain point you need to take the shelter wood off, right? So, and the question is, do you want to wait for your regeneration to be 20, 30 feet tall when you start removing your shelter wood? No. What's the problem with waiting for your regeneration to be 30 feet tall to remove your shelter wood, your final removal? What problem do we have? What was that? What would die? Not necessarily. The shelter would probably be fine. I'm more worried about the regeneration. What would be our problem if we left our regeneration go to 30 foot tall and then we decide to do the final removal at that point? Do we have any concerns about that? Or are we all A-okay? This was a quiz question. Actually, Actually, I think it was a study guide question. I don't know if we had that on the exam though. Or are you just gonna run your equipment through it all? So what issues do we have? What problem do you have during your final cut? There's multiple problems. Anybody? So how many people are good? We're just going to go and cut with 30-foot tall regeneration. We're all good with that. Okay, so the answer is no. So why are you not good with that? What's the downside? So imagine we're in a shelter wood and we have an understory of 30-foot trees, and now you're going to drop all of those big trees. What are we going to do? We're going to kill a lot of regeneration, aren't we? Because at that point, they're probably not all going to be able to be flexible enough to handle trees falling into them. They're all going to break off, right? So you're going to break off a lot of regeneration. How are you going to get the trees out once you fell them? What's that?
Get them out.
You're going to have to skid them out or use a forwarder or something. You got to get them out of there. How are you going to do that? With machines, and you need trails. So you're going to run over a lot of regeneration. That could be 20-25% of your regeneration right there, just getting run over on trails. Just trying to get the trees out that you cut. And keep in mind, you're cutting, if you're doing a standard kind of uniform shelter wood, you'd cut all the trees down. So you'd be dropping a lot of trees on your regeneration, and then you'd have all the removal of the trees, trying to get them out. So shelter wood might not be ideal for trying to maintain 75% canopy, and we need our trees to be at least 20 to 30 feet tall. So at least for that zone. So we'll eliminate shelter wood for the most part. There might be exceptions there. So what does that leave us with? What regeneration method have we not talked about? Remove clear-cut coppice, seed tree, most shelter woods. We're left with one key group. What do we got left? What was the last regeneration method we talked about in class? I'll give you a clue. It can be single tree or it can be group. Starts with an S? Selection. Awesome. Yeah, we can do single tree or group selection. Would that work in this case? Yeah, you probably could do either of those, depending on where you put your groups for group selection, because they tend to be small groups. The openings aren't very big. The gaps are small in a group selection. It's usually several trees, and usually less than a tree height in width. So you might be able to make that work. You wouldn't want to have the whole area covered in gaps, but you could probably do a portion of the area that way. So single tree selection might be your best option, because that's really maintaining continuous canopy cover throughout, and you're just creating little gaps all over, right? So let's say we decide to do single tree selection. So we fell those trees, and maybe we hand fell them, because we're kind of near the vernal pool. How are we going to get those trees out? Because the guidelines say to try to avoid using heavy machinery. So how would we get the trees out of that zone? Any ideas? A small skidder, or what kind of skidder did you see in the lab? What did you say? What kind of skidder? A chain skidder. You mean a cable skidder? Yeah. A cable skidder? So how would that work? How would you use that in this case? Yeah, so you might even be able to park it on the outside of the zone and then just run the cables in, right? So you may not have to bring the machine in at all. You just bring the cables and the chokers in and hook up your logs and pull them out to minimize the impact to the soil that way. So if you had a cable skidder, that'd be awesome, because then you wouldn't even have to bring the machinery into that zone at all. Any other options you can think machinery is bigger and heavier and might not be as ideal. We could go old-fashioned though. Horses. We could do horse skidding if you had it, or if you had smaller machines that you could use in some way. There are some other types of smaller machines out there. Depends on how big your logs are. So some of those small machines wouldn't be able to pull some of these white pines. But yeah, you could use horses. There's still people that do horse logging around. Has anybody ever seen horse logging down in here? There are folks around Maine that still do that. Actually, one of the conservation wardens in the state does it out by Rangeley. So anyway, so there's some options, to try to minimize the impact of heavy machinery. All right, so let's go out further. Let's go out into the life zone. So now we have a little bit more flexibility. Now we only need to maintain 50% canopy cover. Our openings can be up to 1 acre in size, so they can be much bigger. So we're not talking little gaps, we're talking, sizable openings now. We still want to maintain our woody debris, and we still want to minimize impacting soil, and we still want to avoid using chemicals. Those are pretty much uniform throughout. So let's think about our regeneration methods now. So now that we can have 50% canopy removal, and we can have gaps up to 1 acre, what options do we have available to us?
Group selection with larger areas.
Yep, we could do group selection, absolutely. What else could we do? We could do single suicide? Let's go back to what you said on the last one. On the last zone. Shelter woods, yeah. So shelter woods we probably could do in this zone fairly easily. And probably any of them we could do in this zone. It might be that we don't do the whole zone. You may not want to do the whole thing all at one time. So something that has some rotation to it. So group shelter wood, strip shelter wood, an irregular shelter wood, maybe an expanding gap shelter wood would work really well there, right? Because you could create a one acre or smaller half-acre openings, and then let those grow up. Let those get to 20, 30 feet, and then you can go and expand those gaps, right? Because you don't necessarily need to drive over the vegetation that's regenerating. You can, have your trails and go in from different ways and get to those new expanded gaps that you're putting in. So that might be a really good system, especially with the irregular nature of it, and especially if you reserve some trees in those gaps, that would help maintain a little more shade through those openings. So, so you'd want to think a little bit about what you're also trying to regenerate. So that also is going to factor into this. So that's part of the puzzle, is what species are you trying to bring back. So let's see, could you do clear-cut, coppice, or seed tree? What do you think about those practices and help hunters be more successful and try to reduce your deer numbers? So that's the other solution, is to remove the deer themselves. So there's a number of options there. All right. We've been talking about regeneration methods, but there's also issues with heavy equipment. And one of the issues is that they create ruts, especially if you are on soft soils, which often we are near vernal pools. What's the problem with creating ruts that was mentioned yesterday?
Species that breed in vernal pools can mistake the rocks for the actual water body.
Exactly. So amphibians are not the smartest creatures in the world, and they will sometimes think that those long, deep wheel ruts are an acceptable breeding location, and they'll try to breed in those ruts. What's the problem with trying to breed in those ruts?
Dry up.
They dry up quickly. They tend to not be as deep as a regular vernal pool. They're long, they're narrow, they tend to have more open canopy above them. They tend to not make very good breeding locations, and so it becomes an ecological trap. So that was an important term that was mentioned yesterday. They are an ecological trap. So with your operations, you want to make sure that you're not creating those situations. So how do you avoid creating deep ruts in your trails and roads? Yeah, so you can slash mats, especially like if you're using the tops of the trees that you're cutting, you can use those to create a mat for your equipment. So that's one way. That definitely helps. What else can you do to avoid impacting soft, wet soil? What does this say?
Frozen.
Frozen. So harvest in the winter. So pick your season. Or maybe in the fall might be acceptable if it's dry. Given the summer we just had earlier in the fall, you probably could have easily harvested. It's starting to get wetter now, but this fall would have been a good time to do fall harvesting in Maine because it was pretty dry. So that may have worked in some places. You still want to look at the site and say, is it dry enough? Even so. But definitely winter. Winter is always the safe time for harvesting when the ground's frozen. You do need to be careful. There are some areas that don't always freeze well, especially areas that have seeps and some areas just don't fully freeze over. So you just want to be aware of those places. But yeah. A little story. So one downside of winter harvesting is it easy to see your vernal pools in the winter. Yeah, so that can be a problem. So actually when they were, the previous university forest manager before Keith, I think they did some sort of harvest right around in here somewhere. I don't know if they were back farther or if they were in this stand. But you can tell this was the main logging road in here, right? And this was snow covered and frozen. And Al, his name is Al, he needed a log yard. He needed a place to pile up the logs before they hauled them out. And he saw this lovely opening in the forest and said, oh, what a perfect spot. It's already open. Let's put our log yard here. Not knowing that it was a vernal pool. And I think somebody did figure that out, and so they ended up not putting the log yard here. But initially it seemed like a really logical place, right? We don't have to clear brush. There's no trees in the way. Maybe we just remove a few of these little, pesky things on the edges, and we'll have a nice clear log yard. So anyway, so you want to be careful of that because there's a certain attraction to using places that are already open and not knowing what's beneath the snow. So anyway, so that was a good story about how this was almost a log yard. So there's a number of different practices, operational practices, that have the potential to impact vernal pools in different ways, directly and indirectly, or to impact the breeding frogs and salamanders that are in the pool. Trying to think if there's anything else. We mentioned chemicals. Obviously herbicides are used frequently in softwood regeneration, so you definitely want to be careful about using herbicides anywhere within the 400-foot zone. So that's definitely an issue. So you want to be careful of that. So that's where you might want to use more mechanical methods of control. Or biocontrol is sometimes an option depending on where you are, which would be, what do I mean by biocontrol? How do you biologically control shrubs and unwanted vegetation? You can physically pull it out, or you bring in, what was it? Bring in something that eats it, like sheep or goats or Scottish Highland cattle. Exam time.
Okay, I just didn't know that.
Yeah, and usually what I do is, I usually expand the window on either side of it, like I did with this, so that you have some extra time. And for anybody that would have an accommodation, then you've got plenty, like if I go an hour on either side, then you've got like a 4-hour window to get it done. So does that work for everyone? If I gave you just a bigger window around the final exam time? So that will be my plan. If that does not work for you, like if you've got another exam right before or after or something, just let me know. I can change your window. Like I can give you the 2 hours before or the 2 hours after or something different. But So we can be flexible on that. But yeah, it'll basically be the same format,
But is
same
it,
study guide.
Is it Is it all
Cumulative.
Is it like
Yeah,
all
cumulative?
everything?
Yeah, it'll be cumulative again. I'll say the final might be a little bit more cumulative than the second exam was.
Okay.
So make sure you can define silviculture. Make sure there's some basic things you understand. Make sure you still understand shade tolerance. So that will come back up on the final exam then. So just kind of make sure those kind of key concepts that we keep talking about over and over again, and those terms that we use a lot, make sure you know those from earlier in the semester. So yeah, and I will say for the final exam, I like to do a lot more scenario type questions. So I would encourage you to submit scenario questions, but I will always add some of my own. Like John Smith owns 200 acres of this, and his objectives are this. So which silvicultural systems would you use in order to meet his objectives? And explain to me why you've chosen the one or two systems that you think are the best options. Something like that. So to get you to think a little bit about like how you apply all of this into real world scenarios, a little bit more so. Like you had a good one on the last one about site preparation and honeysuckle. Like how would you deal with regeneration failure because you've got an invasive species that's taken over? So how do you go back and deal with that? That was a scenario question that you had on the last exam. So think about those kinds of questions, so that you can think about how to apply the things you've learned during the semester, more so than just regurgitating lists and term definitions. So I find those more interesting. I also find it's easier to get at least partial credit on those kinds of questions. True and false and multiple choice questions, you either get it right or you get it wrong. So it's a fast way to lose points, actually. So I like the essay questions because usually you at least get some credit for it. As long as you put some reasonable answer down, you're going to at least get probably half credit. Okay, before we go, we need to go retrieve our flags. Yep, so go find your flag and come back here. This to the lab. It's been a great group. I mean, everybody that I've had as guest speakers has commented on the great questions you've been asking, and that you've been a really, really great group. And I agree, you guys have been great to work with. So I hope the rest of the semester goes well. I will see you in the world of Zoom for the rest of the semester. So yeah, this was a nice day to kind of end our in-person lab. I wish Friday was going to be this nice. Well, you guys lucked out. You got the good day.
Amber, do you guys want to do like a jump in the air, like a funny face kind of thing?
Oh, Will wants fun video for the... He's actually said you might make a kind of a fun little video of all of us for the end. I don't know. What do you want to do?
You don't have to. We can just leave. That's fine.
I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I hadn't thought about that.
Okay.
We'll wave at you, Will.
Thanks for the enthusiasm.